Europe's hottest eyewear this season costs only about $4 and is made of cardstock paper and is almost completely sold out.
Sky watchers are racing to get their hands on protective glasses as a rare solar eclipse is set to take place today. Experts warn looking directly at the eclipse with the naked eye, even for a few seconds, can cause permanent damage. The sun's rays can burn cells in the retina at the back of the eye, which could cause long-term vision loss. Demand for the glasses has surged, with many supermarkets, pharmacies and opticians running out of stock.
Donc ça fait presque 2 heures d'attente, on est au soleil, c'était long, mais c'est parce que c'est en pénurie à peu près toutes les pharmacies, tous les autres points de vente chez les opticiens, etc. Donc là au moins on est sûr d'avoir des paires qui sont certifiées, etc. Donc il fallait mieux attendre que se brûler les yeux demain.
For just over 2 minutes, day will turn to night as the moon passes between Earth and the sun and blocks its light. The path of totality traces over Spain, France, and Greenland, though millions of others in parts of the northern hemisphere will get a glimpse too. Celestial observers are counting down to the once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Ese minuto y medio lo que espero es ver la grandiosidad de la naturaleza y verlo en familia, luego la lluvia de estrellas, que creo que también hay. Y entonces poder contar algo que muchas veces nos gastamos el dinero en tonterías y no invertimos en cosas tan bonitas como es contemplar algo tan maravilloso.
And if you think it's safer to take photos of the eclipse on your phone, you might want to think again. NASA says sensors in the camera could be damaged and suggests people hold protective glasses in front of their phone's lenses as well.
As Europeans prepare to watch the eclipse, grid operators are standing by for something else entirely. The astronomical event will temporarily cut solar generation across parts of the continent. It comes as a heat wave is already putting pressure on other sources of electricity. So just how much strain can eclipse really put on the grid? Although totality lasts only a couple of minutes, the impact on solar generation lasts much longer. As solar power starts to drop before the eclipse peaks and takes time to recover afterwards. And the partial eclipse unfolds over roughly 2 hours as sunlight gradually fades and then returns. And during that time, solar panels will produce less electricity. Across Europe, loss could reach 9.7 gigawatts. That's roughly equivalent to the average electricity demand of around 23 million homes. In Spain alone, the grid operator says solar power could temporarily fall by as much as 5 gigawatts. That's around 13% of its typical maximum electricity demand. But the challenge isn't simply the amount of power lost. It's how quickly output drops, then comes back. Now, electricity supply and demand have to remain balanced at all times. And as solar generation declines, operators need other sources ready to fill the gap. The good news is an eclipse is highly predictable. Operators know when it's coming so they can prepare. And Europe has done this before. It managed a major solar eclipse back in 2015 without significant disruption. But this time, Europe's power system is already under strain. Extreme heat and low river levels have forced some nuclear and coal plants to reduce production, but also constraining hydropower. So the eclipse itself is unlikely to turn out the lights, but it will test how Europe's power grid, already under pressure, copes with a sudden drop in solar generation.
For an expert's take, we are joined by Ramteen Sioshansi. He's professor at the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the Carnegie Mellon Electricity Industry Center at Carnegie Mellon, of course. Professor, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. So nearly 10 gigawatts may be lost, but it's happening at a time when Europe has more storage than ever, and it's also close to nighttime, as I understand it. So how useful is this test going to be?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your program. As you said in the lead to the interview, there are a few factors that I think will really mitigate the impact of the eclipse. So one is it's highly predictable. Electricity system operators can basically have resources, have other generators standing by and ready to increase their output so that they're able to pick up the demand as supply from the solar panels drops, and then basically do it in reverse once the eclipse starts to abate. The other thing that I would add is, I mean, essentially, electricity system operators deal with an eclipse every day because every day we have nighttime. The only difference is this is for a much shorter duration, and it happens much more quickly than what we experience with the daytime-nighttime cycle.
So, Professor, I wonder what actually happens behind the scenes and what sources of power can they bring in quickly enough to compensate for that lost solar generation?
Yes, that's a great question. So basically, I mean, each day electricity system operators forecast what demand and supply conditions are going to be hour by hour, or in some cases 10 minutes by 10 minutes for the following day. And they basically, based on those forecasts, they determine what other generators, whether they be nuclear generators, natural gas generators, hydro generators, they basically decide which ones need to be switched on and ready to start producing electricity when they're needed based on those forecasts. And again, with an event like a solar eclipse, because it is highly predictable, it actually makes that prediction problem a lot easier. I would argue dealing with a solar eclipse is probably less of a challenge than some unanticipated cloud cover or something that may form and could cause solar plants to reduce output. But if there's also changes in wind pressure, that could also at the same time affect the output of wind turbines. And those types of events in some cases can be much more unpredictable and harder to mitigate than something like a solar eclipse.
Okay. And Professor, we know that Europe dealt with a major eclipse back in 2015 without significant disruption, but solar has become a much bigger part of the electricity mix since then. So does that make managing an eclipse more difficult now?
It does, in the sense that compared to the previous solar eclipse, the amount of electricity supply that is coming from solar resources is much larger today than it was, 5, 10, 15 years ago. So in terms of how much supply is being lost, it's a bigger number. But again, I would just put that in the context of this is what electricity system operators deal with day in, day out, every time that the sun sets. So in some sense, it's not something new. It's just happening at a much faster pace than the daytime nighttime pattern that we experience every day.
Okay, and Professor, some reports say that 2027 next year is going to be the real test. How is that eclipse different, from this one?
Well, I mean, basically as the electricity system is evolving and you're seeing the supply mix changing, you're also seeing the pattern of electricity demand changing. So, for example, my strong assumption is after the heat waves that Europe experienced this summer, you're probably going to see greater and greater uptake of air conditioners. And so that's going to increase electricity demand during the summers. It's going to change the pattern of electricity demand. So over time, you're going to see these types of changes, both in terms of supply and demand.
Okay.
Again, my hope is that because of the predictability of a solar eclipse, and because it's essentially something with which electricity system operators contend every day, hopefully it's not going to tax and disrupt the system.
Okay, so coming back to the present, Professor, this is taking place amid the heat wave that you mentioned as well. It's knocked out reactors, it's knocked out hydro capacity. How complicating is that going to be?
So I don't anticipate that it's going to be complicating for the eclipse tomorrow. However, I think what you are describing is going to become more complicating for electricity systems and planning of electricity systems in a broad sense. And what I mean by that is, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was fairly, it would not be unusual to assume that you could, for example, have your fleet of nuclear generators or your fleet of natural gas generators available to produce electricity when it is needed. We're now seeing with changes in weather patterns, we are seeing conditions where nuclear plants or gas plants might actually have to decrease their output from their capacity, not because of a problem with the plant, but because there's not enough water supply available to keep the plants cool. And so this is going to be essentially an added complication that electricity system operators and planners have to consider when they're making those types of decisions.
Okay, so given these complexities that you mentioned, Professor, what does an event like this tell us about how its power grid needs to improve and change? And could batteries eventually make events like this almost a non-issue?
Well, so in terms of the first question, I mean, basically, the folks who work in the electricity industry need to think about. Essentially, they need to think about more complicating factors. So, again, they need to think about the fact that if you have a if you have a hot summer week, and on top of that, if it has been a dry period, so you have high temperatures and maybe you have less water available for cooling your plants, that could add a complicating factor that you need to take account of that when you are deciding, how many nuclear plants to build or how many gas plants to build or whatever supply mix you're going to build. As to the second part of your question, energy storage, absolutely, whether it's in the form of batteries, whether it's in hydroelectric reservoirs, so there are different ways that we can store energy. That is absolutely it's a technology option that I won't say it makes these problems go away, but it makes dealing with the problems in some cases much, much easier.
Okay, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your expertise and your insight this morning. Ramteen Sioshansi, a professor of engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University.